Hello and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcasts. This week is some of our favourite bits from the Independence Forum for Scotland conference, which took place in Perth a couple of weeks ago. We're calling it Sacrificing Our Heating Bills and Other Good Ideas because that was kind of the theme of it. You'll hear from Craig Dalzell.
Yes, that was his idea. So he wants to not pay his heating bill. So he's got a way of doing that. And other good ideas. I just really, really enjoyed the day, actually. I mean, there's always too much. We can't podcast it all. So we have chosen bits that particularly appeal to us. But a lot of very good ideas.
So what you're going to hear is Craig Dalzell, Annie Miller, and then a Q&A panel.
We don't need to introduce Craig Dalzell, do we? Because everyone knows Craig Dalzell, Common Wheel. Annie Miller she's talking about universal basic income. I had a little chat to her. Now that I've got good at just going up to complete strangers and introducing myself and asking if they'd like to come on the podcast.
With no further ado, let's head over to
Salutations, Adele in Perth.
This whole session's on the topic of wellbeing, economy and poverty, and here's Craig.
So taking off that idea from William of, we don't have a wellbeing economy right now, what will it look like once we've transitioned into it? Just like to reflect that those opposing economic change often frame their opposition of that change causing sacrifice. What do you have to give up to make this happen? It could be something abstract like GDP growth will make you rich. You have to give up that idea, even though GDP growth hasn't made us all rich. It could be something like, the climate transition will force you to give up all your little conveniences, as if the only way to live sustainably is by moving into the forest, gathering berries, and being robed in hemp homespun like some kind of hedge witch. Actually, that sounds like a good idea. Anyone got a forest? Sometimes it's outright conspiracy theory nonsense, like the 15-minute neighbourhood will take away your freedom to drive 45 minutes to the nearest post box if you can get past the military checkpoints at the end of your street. But what if a wellbeing economy wasn't about negative sacrifice? What if it was about fixing the things that actually are not right with the world today? So you're going to be asking over this session, what would a wellbeing economy look like? I'll throw in a few ideas, but I'll frame it through the lens of what do we have to sacrifice to get there. First, quite a small one, the daily commute. I already sacrificed that one. I have worked from home since the pandemic, and I get the privilege. I have a job that can be worked from home. More importantly, I also have a house that can be worked from. Not everyone who has the former has the latter. I'm also a homeowner. I was able to retrofit my house to add an office. Renters in Scotland often can't do that. Renters in Germany can. They're allowed to make reasonable modifications to their house like that without the landlord's permission. So maybe something we need to sacrifice is the kind of landlord lobby that holds Scotland back and builds a housing sector for their profit rather than our well-being. On the commuting side, the Scottish Government recently ditched its target of reducing car miles after being told they weren't doing anything to meet it. The extra pollution that failure will cause will sacrifice people. That is not a well-being economy. Still on houses, I'd like to sacrifice my heating bill, please. Our housing sector is also built for developer profits, so we get expensive to buy, cheap to build, crap, cold, damp homes. And we have a retrofitting strategy that puts the responsibility of fixing those homes onto you. I mentioned that retrofit I did to create an office. That actually, doing that out of my own pocket actually locked me out of public funding that came along later to retrofit the rest of my house, which is why I don't have solar panels right now. We should be treating these retrofits as a massive public works infrastructure project rather than telling people, it's just like renovating your kitchen, isn't it? I'd like to sacrifice buying things. Probably the biggest mindset shift we've seen in society over the last 20 years or so runs like this. It used to be, I need a thing, I'll walk down to the high street and buy it. Then it shifted to, I need a thing, I'll drive out to the out-of-town retail store and buy it. Right now it's, I need a thing, I'll buy it from Amazon Prime and have someone with a crap job deliver it to me tomorrow. The next mindset shift needs to be, I need a thing, I'll walk down the high street and borrow it from the library. Yes. The Scottish Government made a promise to the 2021 Climate Assembly to deliver 75 new tool libraries around Scotland. By the end of 2024, they'd only delivered 9. The minister at the time of that promise told me personally that they knew that 75 new libraries wasn't enough to create that mindset shift, but, and I quote, they hoped that the private sector would fill the gap. Guess what? It didn't. While I'm down High Street, I'd like to sacrifice the Thatcherist mindset that there's no such thing as society. Because that, quote, has actively pushed society out of our lives in favour of consumerism. Think of your community right now. Think of a space that you can go to where you have a reasonable chance of meeting someone that you know, and it's a place where you can exist for as long as you want without the expectation of having to buy something. Harder than you thought, wasn't it? I think the protests over the removal of the steps at Buchanan Street in Glasgow are emblematic of that. And let's face it, those steps, objectively, they're not particularly nice. They're not that comfy. When you're sitting on them, you're kind of getting in the way of people who are moving around. It's not that convenient. They're not exactly an urban nature park, but they are a place where you can be in the city without the expectation of having to buy something. They're also a focal point for protests and organisation. If that's not society, what is? Glasgow Council keeps wanting to turn them into shops. I kind of wonder if that's more about suppressing protest than encouraging consumerism, but that's another talk. Another thing I'd like to sacrifice is want and poverty. I want to see a job guarantee so that everybody who wants a job can work. I also want to see a universal basic income so that nobody needs to work, even if they want to. Because it's that need that keeps us poor. It's that need of having a job because you'll be destitute without one that keeps us in jobs that are low paid and have bad conditions, because if we kick up a fuss, there's always someone more desperate who can take that job from us. The rich weaponise the poor against us. And it doesn't matter where we are in that hierarchy of rich and poor, because there's always someone richer and there's always someone poorer. So that's the final thing I'd like to sacrifice when I'm creating a wellbeing economy. That idea that we're not all in this together. The idea that there are people in this world who are better than you. Whether it's by dint of magic blood and the fact that their magic hat can go around making you a commander of the British Empire. Or whether it's an overtanned man-baby who wants to play with real-life toy soldiers on his birthday. Or whether there's any number of warlords who think that history will remember them kindly for their war crimes as they murder civilians by the score. That's when I know we'll have a well-being economy and a well-being society. No kings, not real ones, not fake ones. Just a society that puts all of us first.
And this is Annie Miller talking about UBI, Universal Basic Income.
What I'm going to talk to you about today is more about the questions that are facing us. Let me start with a bit of history. In medieval Europe, the main responsibility for poor relief lay with the monasteries, who provided charity, which was welcome, but it wasn't. It was insecure, so it didn't fulfil all the requirements. And then, after the Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries, it passed, certainly in England, to the local parishes. And with the Poor Law 1601, they set up workhouses or poorhouses. And there was a lot of very brutal servicing of poor people. It was really humiliating, and everyone hated the idea of being in the workhouse. This is a type of a social security called social assistance. It was moderated in 1948 under the Attlee administration, which I still think is the best administered government we've ever had in this country. And they had a social assistance scheme which was much more humane, and the administrators were encouraged to help people to claim their benefits. This has got worse over the years and is now in the form of a social assistance scheme, means-tested benefits, where the administrators get brownie points or extra marks for getting people off benefits. Not my idea of good social assistance. Now, in the meantime, during the last century and a half, local voluntary insurance schemes set up, and these were rationalised by Beveridge in the Beveridge Report of 1942, and now we have the National Assistance Act of 1946. The trouble with national insurance is that it's only for workers. It's a good thing for workers, it's a contract for workers, but it doesn't cover everyone. There are large gaps for people who don't work. In 1975 to 77, the government introduced a child benefit, and it was giving us a modest amount for each child in the country. And what was good about it is that it was a prototype of a basic income. So here we have 4 types of benefit system that we need to choose between. We have charity, which was welcome but didn't fit the bill. We have social assistance, which can be brutal or mild, or as it is today, which is pretty awful. And we have national insurance, which is good, but it's limited to who it accommodates. And then we have the possibility of a basic income. The point about a basic income is that it's a cash benefit, it's paid periodically, it's based on the individual, it's universal, and it's unconditional. And that is what I would like to recommend that we have. One of the justifications for it comes from Thomas Paine, whom someone mentioned earlier. Thomas Paine in 1796 said, "The land and natural resources belong to the people, and those who appropriate them for private use owe an annual ground rent to the whole excluded population." Now that's the basis for a basic income, that's the justification for it. A basic income is a restoration of the right of all of us to our share of the land and natural resources. And it also includes our material heritage. And a World Bank study in 2005 found that a lot of the wealth of the economy lay in the institutions of the people, especially the rule of law. All of us contribute to that. And so it's all of these things upon which we can claim a restitution of our rights. I just want to think about what's happened in the past. I wanted to ask, why do we have poverty? And I agree with our previous speaker, Eva Comrie, that it's government policy. Just think of the Tory Blair government of 1997, and they declared that they wanted to get rid of child poverty by the year 2020. Well, my first question is, why wait? Why wait for 20 years to get rid of it? Do it straight away. And then they missed their first base in 2005. In 2008, Gordon Brown reduced the income tax rate from 22% to 20%. Why do that? He could have used that to prevent child poverty. And one of the other problems with child poverty is that governments don't like helping the parents. They think the parents are lazy scroungers and they don't want to help. They want to help the children, but not the parents, which again is a nonsense. Now, I'm afraid that economists have been partly responsible for this attitude to people who are in poverty, and that's because the economics only considers people who are well off. And so anyone who is less well off should be equally able to work and do all the other things, but in fact many of them are absolutely deprived, either in consumption or in leisure. And when people are deprived, they react very differently to economic stimuli like unearned income or state benefits, and to wage rates and other prices. And these people don't have enough to live on, they can't get decent food, they can't get vegetables and fruit, which are the kings and queens of the diet. And they also have, with the present social administrative system, the way it's administered produces anxiety and insecurity, and with it mental health problems. In other words, our governments actually make people ill. Why don't they stop making people ill, help them to get healthy, and then they'll be in a fit state to get a job? Another reason is that we have growing inequality in society. That's because we have high tech happening, people get high wages, but the people on the lowest wages are still on the low wages that they had before. And with the government policy of only increasing the lowest wages and the social security benefits by inflation, means that they are still on a level of income which is appropriate for the lowest part of society about 30 years ago, or whenever it was they last measured this. So if these people are just increased by inflation and everyone else goes up by an accumulation of growth, which may be slow, but by accumulated it grows more than you'd expect. And so the people, the benefits are completely dissociated from the rest of society. Their benefits are completely inadequate. We have an OECD poverty benchmark, which I think, yes, Bill mentioned before. The worst news about that, it says 60% of median, etc., etc. That is for a couple. And then they have methods of allocating it for before housing costs are taken into account and after housing costs are taken into account. So it's even worse than that. And even then, under the current levels, people will be getting about £196 a week if they kept to the OECD or EU benefit levels. But in fact, I think the latest rate was about £96.20 or something like that, about half what they should be getting. So people are not just living at a subsistence level, they're living well below it, and no wonder they're getting fed up, no wonder they're getting ill, no wonder they have mental health issues. When we have growth, and the government keeps thinking about we want more growth, what happens with growth is it makes rich people even richer, and poor people maybe a tiny bit richer, just enough to stop them bothering the rich people that they should have a better share of that income. So if we're going to have growth, we're going to have an even greater inequality. We should never have growth without having redistribution. Redistribution is the key, and that means that we, someone said, we're just middle class people who are talking about poverty. The reason is it's our duty, it's our responsibility to see that change is played. We have to say we are prepared to be taxed higher. I'm prepared to be taxed higher, not to make rich people richer, but just to make poor people get their fair share of resources. Now, you may recall that between the years 2018 and 2020, there was a feasibility of basic income study, and it was financed by £250,000 by the Scottish Government. They took a lot of analysis and everything, but they found four major problems with the basic income. The first one was Scotland doesn't have the powers to introduce the basic income or to raise the finance to pay for it. Secondly, they wondered whether it was going to be too difficult to implement a basic income together with to integrate it with the current social security system. Thirdly, they worried about the cost. And fourthly, they wondered whether it would actually encourage people to reduce their work hours. Well, I tell you, a whole lot of people are working far more than the recommended number of hours, and they should reduce their hours of work. Anyway, none of the first one is insurmountable unless we get independent, roll-on independence. The others are not unduly unsurmountable, with the careful thought they can be got over. The question is, what sort of society do we want? I like the idea of liberty, equality and fraternity. I like the idea of people being emancipated and having choice. I believe in equality, the well-being that we've been talking about, and justice. And fraternity. I want a reduction in inequality of income, which would lead to a just, united and inclusive society. And I would remind people of the MACE, of which it is inscribed integrity, compassion, wisdom and justice. And I would like to add hope. I hope that we get an independent Scotland which can create the sort of society that we would like to see, where everybody is catered for, everyone has choice, everyone has well-being, and we are an inclusive society, and we value our society with our friends and neighbours. Thank you.
And now there's a question and answer session with the Poverty and Wellbeing Economy panel.
Time for our Poverty and Wellbeing Economy panel. You've already been introduced to Eva Comrie and Craig DL. We also have between Eva and Craig, we have Dave Thompson. Dave is convener of Christians for Independence, but you may remember him as an MSP, firstly for the Highlands and Islands region and then for Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch. So that is Dave. Then we have Jim Osborne. Jim was in insurance for many years. He had a 28-year career with Alliance UK in the claims division, was involved in the Yes movement in 2013-14, joined the Scottish Currency Group, which is what he's part of now, in 2020, particularly interested in pensions and the future of pension provision in an independent Scotland. So that's your panel, and I will kick off by asking the first of William's questions, and then we'll let people chip in. So the first question, what social beliefs, ethical values and standards should sit at the centre of a well-being economy framework?
I think essentially it's about valuing each individual. Every individual has got talent, we just need to find it so that everybody can make a valuable contribution to our society. I don't know if anybody's ever watched the Channel 4 series The Piano, but that's a fantastic example of talent that's hidden amongst even the most broken backgrounds, and that's an inspiration, and that's a good example of how we need to find the potential in each and every one person and maximise that.
So this question cuts right to the heart of what Commonweal is and what we were founded for, and even our very name, Commonweal. I don't need to give the full lecture, I guess, but it's the Scots version of the word Commonwealth. But wheel in Scots means more than just money, it does mean well-being. So our core philosophy is that a society is only as resilient as its weakest and most vulnerable member. So when we say all of us first, that's what we mean. Wellbeing economy puts all of us first.
I think the thing that needs to mark out Scotland is something that's already started. The Scottish social security system, for instance, and their training of their staff, they emphasise the need to look after people, be kind to people, be humane in their dealings with people, to encourage people to claim what they are entitled to. In comparison, if you ever have the unfortunate experience of coming across the UK social security system, you'll find that almost the opposite philosophy applies. And I think that's really important, and I think it's a feather in the cap for the Scottish Government. I don't agree with everything the Scottish Government does, despite being a member of the SNP for many years until not that long ago. But on this one, they've got it right. We've got to approach these things in the right way. And we need to find a new name. I'm sure people have been trying this for a while for benefits and all the rest of it. We need to start calling them well-being support or something like that, that is a positive thing and not something that implies that they're scrounging or whatever. So I think that is a key thing that we need to look for in a well-being Scotland.
Listen to these men and listen to the views expressed today makes me want to cry with frustration when we know the potential in our country and the potential of our people to make our country exactly the Scotland that we know it can and should be. So what would be at the centre of a wellbeing economy for me would be truth, honesty, integrity, mutual respect and a positive attitude towards our fellow human beings. Not restricted to those of us who are lucky enough to live and work in Scotland, but internationally too. So in terms of wellbeing, I think that there is a local, a regional, a national and an international perspective to that. And Scots can do our part at home and abroad to make sure that the world becomes a brighter, happier place for everybody.
Any views or questions from the floor?
Hello. I'm just thinking latterly, one of the things that Annie said there about on the wellbeing economy, that come out of the sort of cyclical aspect of, well, if you improve education and therefore you open up the access to better employment, that sort of has the aspect of reducing health issues, etc., you get this cycle. And I just wonder if you were going in advance and saying, well, okay, if we increase the amount of basic income that people have from the savings that we have from NHS, I just wonder if there's ways of working within the pot, bearing in mind what the end achievement would be.
Craig, do you want to go with that immediately?
I can go further than that. There have been a few studies that have looked at this in the EU and in Canada that found, the EU one found that every 10 euros you gave to someone on a basic income reduced costs to social security, healthcare, etc. by about 13 euros. The universal basic income was cheaper than the poverty it solved. That really makes poverty just a political choice.
Okay, we'll take one more. Okay, and we'll move on to the second question, which we already started on a wee bit.
Yeah, on the words are important, of course. I think we should be looking at and considering that it's not a benefit, it's social investment. And that we need to start looking at investing in preventative healthcare and not waiting until people are already sick.
This is a natural segue with question 2. What policy ideas are central? And whoever wants to grab the microphone first can be first to answer.
I think the first one is that Scotland has to have its own currency. Beyond that, I think that a voluntary job guarantee scheme supported by the state is an essential policy. And this doesn't mean a kind of crude Keynesian filling potholes and digging potholes and filling them up again. It means providing state support for employment, useful employment. I mean, there are a lot of community organisations who are trying to do work at the community level, and it's all reliant on volunteers. There is certainly scope for paid employment within these kind of community organisations, and that is the kind of thing that a voluntary job guarantee scheme could facilitate. So that's one. I think another key policy is that to develop a wellbeing economy, the state needs to intervene in key markets. For example, the markets for food, the market for housing, the market for energy. These are key elements of essential for a decent life. For example, after the war, the post-war British government introduced the Agricultural Act 1947. And the objective of that act was to provide state guaranteed prices for producers and also stable prices for consumers. And 2 examples of state agencies which were created by that act, and you probably remember them, some of the older people, was the Milk Marketing Board and the Egg Marketing Board. They go to work on an egg adverts, which you might remember. But they're examples of state agencies which intervene in the markets for key essentials and control the prices, which is important for tackling poverty. This is a pet of mine, and this is that Scotland have an ambition to introduce an earnings-related pension scheme after independence. That would replace flat rate UK state pension with an earnings-related state pension, and that would be supported by a defined benefit pension from a national pension fund. I'm not going to go into any further detail, spoken about it at the SSRG conference, but this is doable, and it will give us a viable and decent pension system which guarantees income security for everybody.
So 3 years ago, the last time someone asked me if you could have one policy, just one policy that you advocate for, what would it be? And I answered with, the Scottish Government should make new build housing standards equal to passive housing to eliminate heating bills. And about 2 months after I gave that answer, the Scottish Government announced they were going to do exactly that. We're still working out the details there, but exciting things to come. So fresh off that success, now I've been asked the question again, want a universal basic income sufficient to cover basic needs?
Given a lot of this is not going to be possible until we get independence, that's obviously got to be our top priority, and we need to up the ante on that. But we need to maximise benefits that are already available, and I'm thinking about UK-wide benefits. There's underclaiming, massive underclaiming. So investment in money advice services, I was involved many years ago in setting up services in the Highlands. via the Citizens Advice Bureau and also the Council's own services. But a lot of councils have now backed away from it because of lack of money. Now, it's a false saving, because the more you can make sure that people are claiming what is available and they're entitled to, the better you make their lives, the better you make society, and the better well-being that these people have. I'm here from Christians for Independence. I have a Bible called the Poverty and Justice Bible, and in that Bible, 2,000 references to poverty and justice. So at the very essence of the group that I represent is an emphasis on helping and dealing with poverty and ensuring justice for people. And that's what we've really got to do. And we need to use things in the interim to show people how much better it can be.
There's a consensus developing here and elsewhere within our independence movement to the effect that we tackle poverty in a number of different ways, but we target particularly housing and energy costs, food costs, etc. And we all know that. And those are the areas that we can only address appropriately when we are independent, because between now and then, we're just putting a stick and plaster on a hemorrhaging, amputated limb. So the difficulty that I see for the time being is an awful lot of this, sadly, is a pipe dream. There is much that can be done, we know, particularly relative to housing. As was mentioned earlier, there's a lot that local authorities can do in terms of fundraising, etc., to be able to facilitate that. But from my perspective, the nuts and bolts are there, provided we're independent, we harness our own resources for our own sake. But what we should never lose sight of is the desire to have an egalitarian outlook. And I was reminded earlier on, I think it was when Jim was speaking, of Jimmy Reed's famous phrase that I'll never remember the words exactly, but you know the one I mean, when he talks about walking down the dark streets in Govan and it's raining and he's thinking who the bairns are that are sitting behind these windows, up these tenements and in these closes. And that's what I feel every day in Scotland, that there are hundreds of Scots, thousands of Scots, hundreds of thousands of Scots whose potential is not realised because they don't get the life chances that they should get, because they're born into poverty, and when they get to school, their attendance isn't sufficiently regular and they're not actually able to learn the skills that they would be able to learn did they come from a stable family background. So one of my priorities would be education linked up with real, tangible social work and assistance for kids to keep them at home and stable and learning and able to make something of their own lives without descending into spirals of accommodation away from home or criminality, which often follows upon. Not because they're bad people, because they're inherently not, but they've not had the life chances that those of us who were more fortunate did have. So that would be a major priority for me, and one I think that leads to the well-being of the country as well as the individuals.
There's space for probably 2 points, and then we'll move on to the next. We'll scrunch together the next 2 questions to make it easier as well. So here we go.
So it's certainly true that without independence, real transformational change is not going to happen. However, if a Scottish Government within a devolved context were to pick a fight, that would encourage and possibly regrow trust in, say, my party, the Scottish National Party. Because if they pick that fight, let us say, over the housing issue, you could do that under devolution. It would test centrists within my party. It would expose them, and it would make them uncomfortable if that were to be pushed. That's point number one. Point number two, if they took on board something like the housing initiative we were talking about earlier on, then that in itself would cause a bit of a brouhaha in the political establishment and in the mainstream media. Now, if it failed, there would still be a development of trust, because if the Scottish Government were to take something like that, try it and fail, the public and the people would see that they were trying. And I'll finish with one point. During the leadership election, I'm just using this as an exemplar, not because I'm a driven obsessive over this one issue. During the leadership at Hustings, the trade union group of which I'm the convener, held in the STUC headquarters, which is interesting that they allowed that to happen there. I put a question on, a levy on the 92% of whisky production that goes abroad, 30 million's worth at least, with no levy on it at all. Kate Forbes replied, and this is an interesting political point. Remember, she was in pole position, squeaky bum time, could have become First Minister. She replied, the 4 words, they won't let you. Isn't it interesting that no one in the Scottish media picked up on squeaky bum, she could have been First Minister, referencing the Scottish Whisky Association, and she said, they won't let you. No journalist, other than the National, picked up on that point. That's a phenomenally interesting narrative that no one picked up on. Why not? And she exposed herself to that in the confidence that the media wouldn't pick it up.
Actually, I think this is going to be very unpopular, but anyway, I think we've got a real blind spot, especially in Scottish government, but also in the movement, in that we've got a blind spot with business. And if you think of the policies we've spoken about in this, this session, but also throughout today, almost all of them have been about spending. And actually, we've had very little talk about policies that grow the economy, create jobs, or drive exports. And I think we need to have, as a movement, a bit more of a refocus onto that, because it's that that's going to create the jobs, which is actually going to help us in terms of our health, our well-being, and so on. And I think we've got a blind spot. Scottish Government hasn't spoken to business in a decade, and I think that's an opportunity for the movement to start talking about it and thinking about how we can do that.
Breaking on a little bit, so I'm going to put the last 2 questions into one, so concentrate. I will start with Eva this time, because it's only fair. Because how much change will be needed, and how do we create the political and economic space in an independent Scotland to make it happen?
I think Scotland needs to be governed by real people, not party politicians who are enthralled to a political leader, and where their values and their judgment becomes flawed inevitably. And that's not directed at any particular individual, it's just human nature. So the change that Scotland needs to realise its potential is for folk in this room to be standing for Parliament or Council, or even Westminster if they really must. But that's what needs to happen. None of what we've spoken about today is going to come about very readily if we continue to rely on a party political structure, because there are far too many vested interests, you scratch my back, etc. We all know the gossip, you know the stuff you read in the press, some of it's true, some of it's hugely exaggerated, but there are people doing favours for each other all the time. There are little black books all over the bloody place. And that's how it works. And that is one of the main reasons why, at the moment, Scotland is, to use a technical term, stuffed. And it will remain stuffed unless and until people of honesty and integrity, who have a life outside politics, who are not there for the gravy, who've made their mark in the world, who might have their own business, who might have been very, very successful and are there because their heart's in it, and in their heart and their soul they know that independence is the answer. These are the people that should be leading our country, they should be leading our movement, and they would take us out of the 19th century in some respects, and they'd be firing on all cylinders well into the 21st.
Well, Eva's right, obviously. We want conviction politicians. We don't want career politicians. We don't want people who are in there for their own benefit. And you know, the movement and the SNP in the past was full of conviction politicians, because back in 1965, when I joined the SNP, it wasn't for career enhancement, I can assure you, but exactly the opposite. And I did well despite that. Given I was in local government was dominated by the Labour Party. But we do need people who are going to have that strong belief that what they're doing is right. And also the The now's to actually take chances, as Paul said, go for something. Even if you think somebody else is going to stop you. Because in the going for it, then you actually convince people that you're sincere and you know what you want to do. And if others stop you, that's a bonus for you politically. So people need political antennae. The point about business, I absolutely agree. We need to be thinking about businesses. And my son and my wife for a while ran a wee cafe, didn't make any money. It was a bit of a disaster at the end of the day. But one thing I've always felt about small cafes and restaurants and so on is that at the moment they're hit with 20% VAT. Now I know VAT is a reserved thing, but an independent Scotland could deal with this. You shouldn't be charging small cafes and restaurants, small businesses, 20% VAT. Cafes by definition deal in food. There's no input VAT on food, so you cannot reclaim the VAT against your expenditure because there's little or no VAT expenditure. So a 5% VAT on cafes would boost millions of small businesses all over the place. That's the sort of thing. Now, we could agitate for that, we can press the government on that, and I don't know why people haven't been pushing these things. And you would end up then with lots of small family businesses, just with a few people working them, making a decent amount. And the other problem with the VAT, of course, is the threshold is quite low, and you need to have a proper sliding scale as you go into it, because if you, I'm not sure what it is now, but certainly before, once your turnover reached 70 grand, you had to pay 20% VAT. So if you earned £1 more than 70 grand, you lost 20% of the 70 grand that you'd already taken in. Absolute madness and not encouraging business. That might seem a very simple and small thing, but I think it could be a really good campaigning tool for us, and it should be introduced by the UK government. Let's push it on.
A couple of things to help Neva's point about getting ordinary folk into politics. We can do this at the top and the bottom of Scottish politics. We don't even need to wait till Indy to do it. At the bottom, we need municipal government. We need our town councils, our village councils, our community councils to be given statutory powers to operate in the same way that municipal government in Europe works. Scotland needs the kind of local government that the rest of Europe calls normal. Second, instead, we need an upper chamber to oversee Scotland, the Scottish Parliament. Not a House of Lords, a House of Citizens. Fill it with people drawn in the same way that we draw lots for jury duty. Draw by sortition so that it's balanced across geography, across income, across other demographics, and all of us then will get drawn at the hat and we serve our time actually overseeing Parliament and overseeing the laws that govern the country. If we are treated like we are capable of governing if someone has transgressed the law, then we are capable of judging the law itself. So we need a House of Citizens there too. I think those 2 points would be a massive change that would help us get towards that. We don't even need to wait till Indy. And if the people in the way of that change, who are largely politicians in Holyrood, well, there's an election coming. Maybe we should ask them who wants to change there.
Answer the fourth question first, which is about how do we create political and economic space. I think the most important thing is that we need a written constitution, and not just a bland one, but one which enshrines fundamental socio-economic and human rights, such as the right to food, the right to energy, the right to housing, the right to a pension, the right to work, the right to a decent income, etc. If that is written into the Constitution, then every post-independence government is obliged to deliver on it. So I think that will create the space. So I think that when we're talking about the Constitution and the road to independence, we need to include these socio-economic rights in it, and it will become the manifesto for independence. So that's the first thing. William Thompson asked the question earlier on, and he asked whether we were further away, will we be further away from a well-being economy by the time of independence? And everybody seemed to think that it wouldn't be. I don't think that is necessarily the case, because I believe that there is scope within the devolution settlement to start laying some of the foundations. For example, and this is a practical suggestion. It's about community wealth building. Now, energy is a major source for community wealth building, either through community ownership of energy or through their participation in the community benefit funds, which are supposed to be provided by commercial wind farm developers. One thing that the Scottish Government could do is increase the demands upon developers to provide much more funds for community benefit than is currently provided for at the moment. The other thing is that communities themselves can take ownership of these assets. In Argyll and Bute, there is a consortium of local development trusts in Cowell who've formed an organisation called Cowell Community Energy. And they submitted a bid to take over the lease of the Cruachmoor wind farm in Glendalough Road. That was rejected by Forest and Land Scotland, which is a disgrace. But Cowell Community Energy are now applying to take ownership of the land and earn revenues from the lease to the new operator. So there are things that can be done there. Now, what's important about that is that community wealth, once communities have access to these kind of funds, they can start to do things for themselves. It creates local empowerment. It increases local capacity and local skills. Gives people who are disadvantaged, the left out and left behind, opportunities to do things. So that's something we could do now. The other thing that we could do now is use the assets of our major local authority pension funds. The local authority pension fund in Scotland currently control assets of 60 billion. Very little of that is invested in Scotland. That our businesses and our economy and our infrastructure requires investment from these funds. Now, one of the things that's stopping them is what they call the law of fiduciary duty. Now, there's a very interesting development going on in the UK Parliament on this. There is a second reading of the pension schemes bill happening in Westminster in July. Now, a campaigning organisation called Share Action, together with some industry bodies, are putting an amendment to the vote in that. That amendment is designed to increase the scope of what we call fiduciary duty. Now, I don't think it will make a lot of difference to the management to defined contribution pension schemes, but it will give local authority pension schemes in Scotland greater scope to take more risk, to think in terms of investments in a more longer term fashion. After independence, I believe that one of the things that Scotland can do is create a national pension fund. And that would not only be a source of earnings-related pensions for our citizens, but it would also be a massive fund for investment in our businesses and our infrastructure.
Okay.
Pick up on what Jim talked about there. Local authority pension funds, I've got a vested interest because I have one. And they're very well managed at the moment by the local authorities. And the best thing that ever happened to me, and it gets back to your previous point, Jim, was at the age of 18, when I started working with local government, I was forced to put 6% of my pay into the pension scheme, and the council put some in as well. Now, when I was in my 20s, with 4 kids and a mortgage and all the pressures that come with it, if I'd been able to get access to that money, I would have done. I would have taken it out to help us just survive through that period. As it was, we survived. I'm still here, as you can see. But the best thing was, it was a compulsory thing, and I reaped the benefit eventually when I got my pension at the end of the day. But I would just add a wee cautionary note about taking more risk with these funds, and I do accept they could be better used in Scotland possibly. I don't know if you remember the Western Islands Council and Donald MacLeod. A friend of mine, I used to work for the Western Islands Council, and he took a risk and bankrupted the Western Isles Council. There was a huge problem with the pension funds and borrowing at very advantageous rates. So I'd be very careful about anybody gambling with my pension.
Okay, Jackie.
Okay. Thinking about some of the little things that we could do either now or come independence. The Nordic countries, and Denmark's where I've got my experiences, how they use tax incentives to get people to do the things that they want them to do and the things that they don't want them to do. So I'm thinking about how we reduce corporation tax to make sure that we've got workers on the boards. They're diverse boards that they can think beyond just the managerial class. Just some thoughts on that.
We need to send people home quite soon, so what I would like to say is thank you to every member of the panel and to every member of the audience who interacted, and who didn't get the chance to interact, and I hope you all found it as fascinating a discussion as I did. And could you please put your hand together for either Comrie, Dave Thompson, and
We hope you enjoyed that. There was a lot more said. Actually, there's a very, very good write-up about the conference on the website, ifs.scot website. Go and have a read of that. I think
we'll put the link in the notes.
Yeah. Well, we said this already, haven't we? There just seem to be kind of in a stride. They're really good at, continuity. At the beginning of this one, they told us what all the updates were from the previous one. And that's so valuable, actually. It's really well organised and thought through.
And as we did before, we'd issue a challenge maybe or an invitation to any of our elected representatives. Get yourself along to some of these events, because the topic of conversation you would find interesting, and I'm sure you'd be able to contribute it, but also you would take a lot away from it as well.
Yeah, good.
Anyway, that's it. We'll catch you later. Bye now. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.